You know those nights when everything seems too quiet? That kind of stillness that makes you hear your own heartbeat, every creak in your car, and suddenly you become hyper-aware. I was driving along an empty stretch of highway with only my headlights cutting through the darkness. It had been a long day, and my eyelids were starting to feel heavy. The soft hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt weren't helping with my fatigue. I glanced at the clock, 12:47 a.m. The next town was about 30 miles away, but I figured I'd make it without a problem if my car kept running. Suddenly, the engine made a strange noise. A small shudder ran through the car, and by instinct, I leaned forward as if that could fix it. The dashboard lights flickered, and without warning, the engine died completely. My heart sank. The power steering stopped working, and the car started to slow down as I desperately tried to coast it to the side of the road. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, pulling over to the shoulder. I took a deep breath, hoping it was just a temporary glitch. I turned the ignition key again. The engine just made a faint sound before falling silent. I tried again and again. Nothing. The reality hit me. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, alone, with no lights, no cars passing by, just a vast darkness on a deserted road. The starry sky was bright, but even that felt distant, indifferent to my plight. I reached for my phone, hoping for some signal. I looked at the screen. No service. Of course. I sighed and leaned my head back against the seat, weighing my options. I could wait for a car to pass, but I hadn't seen one in what felt like hours. Or I could start walking, though I had no idea how far I was from civilization. As I sat there debating what to do, I noticed a flicker of light in my rearview mirror. At first it was faint, but with every passing second it grew brighter. Relief flooded over me. Finally, someone else on this road. Maybe they would stop to help. The lights were approaching slowly, and something about that put me on edge. I turned in my seat to get a better look. The vehicle was still a good distance away, but it was moving at an oddly measured pace. It wasn't speeding past like most cars would on an open road late at night. Instead, it was approaching cautiously, as if the driver was in no hurry. I checked my phone again, still no signal. The lights continued their slow approach, casting long shadows on the road. I rolled down my window, hoping to flag them down, but as the vehicle got closer, something about the way it moved gave me a chill. It wasn't just the speed, it was the silence. I couldn't hear an engine. I couldn't hear the tires on the asphalt, just the sound of the wind over the empty fields. When the vehicle finally pulled up behind me, my pulse hammered in my throat. I leaned out the window, raising an arm in a feeble attempt to signal, but the car, if you could call it that, just sat there, its headlights blazing onto the rear of my car, casting a harsh glow in my rearview mirror. But no one got out. I waited, expecting to see the driver emerge, but the door never opened. "Hey, do you have a phone? I'm stranded here," I called out, my voice rough. Silence. I swallowed hard, my hand still on the door handle. My instincts screamed not to get out, but what other choice did I have? I slowly opened the door. The hinges creaked in the night's stillness, much louder than they should have sounded. My feet hit the pavement, and the moment I stood up, the vehicle's headlights went dark. The sudden darkness made my eyes struggle to adjust. For a second, I thought maybe they were saving battery, or didn't want to blind me, but as my vision improved, I realized something. The vehicle, or whatever it was, wasn't just silent now. It was completely invisible, melting into the night. I could barely make out its silhouette, but it was bigger than I expected. No car should be that large. A shiver ran down my spine. My breathing hitched. I backed up, my instinct screaming at me to retreat. But just as I did, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the direction of the now invisible vehicle. My heart pounded in my throat as I tried to make out who or what was approaching. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun. I stood there, breathless, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the silence stretched on. No voices, no movement, just the eerie stillness of the night. I quickly scrambled back into my car and slammed the door shut. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the locks. I didn't know what was out there that night, and I don't want to know. But I still feel its presence every time I drive past that stretch of road, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, waiting.
It's strange how fast something can go from a fun adventure to something that stays with you forever. It was supposed to be a great trip, a weekend road trip with my closest friends, just like old times before life got so busy. You know the kind of trip, laughs until your stomach hurts, stops at weird roadside attractions, music blasting as we left the city behind. But that excitement didn't last long. What started as a carefree escape became something I still can't explain. It was the second night of the trip. We were in the middle of nowhere, just south of the state line. None of us knew exactly where we were, and that was part of the excitement, just following the road. The sky was filled with stars, the air was cool with that sharp edge that makes you want to roll the window down a little further. We had been driving for hours, laughing, losing track of time, but then the GPS failed. The screen went blank, flickered back, but the map was just gray. The system tried to recalculate once, twice, but the suggested routes made no sense. At first, I shrugged it off. Surely we were in a dead zone. It happens all the time. But half an hour later, the GPS was still out of service, and we were running low on gas. "We should find a gas station," I said, looking at the dashboard. "We're running on empty." Sam, who was driving, nodded. "Yeah, I'll keep an eye out." The highway was unnervingly empty, no sign of life, just a long stretch of asphalt flanked by dark fields and clusters of trees. No lights, no houses, no other cars, just us. Initially, it was peaceful, but then it felt different, like we were completely alone in the world. "Is anyone else getting a weird feeling about this?" Sarah asked from the back seat. "Yeah," I admitted. "It feels strange." We all agreed. It was hard to pinpoint what felt so out of place, maybe the loneliness or the non-functioning GPS. Either way, the trip's cheerful vibe had evaporated. About 15 minutes later, we saw it, a gas station in the distance. It was small, one of those that looked straight out of the 1980s. Its neon sign flickered faintly, casting a dim glow over the empty parking lot. "Finally," Sam mumbled, turning into the station. The place looked deserted. No other cars, no movement inside the small convenience store, just the hum of the fluorescent lights over the pumps. We all got out of the car, stretching our legs, while Sam started filling the tank. "I'm gonna grab some snacks," Sarah said, heading for the store. "Anyone want anything?" "Chips," I called after her. I walked around the car, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had been with me since the GPS died. The night was too quiet. No crickets, no wind through the trees, nothing. Just the slight hiss of gasoline flowing into the tank. A few minutes passed and I realized Sarah still hadn't returned. "I'm gonna see what's taking her," I said, heading toward the store. When I pushed the door, a bell rang above me, but the sound was odd, dull, as if the air inside were heavier. The store was dimly lit, the aisles narrow and packed with dusty products. It looked like no one had bought anything there in years. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly. Nothing. I walked the aisles, expecting to see her, looking for snacks, but she wasn't there. The place was empty. A shiver went down my back. "Sarah, stop messing around," I said, a little louder. Silence. I headed toward the back of the store, where a door presumably led to a bathroom or storage room. The door was slightly open, with a faint light escaping from inside. I pushed it open cautiously. Inside was only a small, dirty restroom, no sign of Sarah. Panic began to bubble in my stomach. Where the hell was she? She couldn't have gone outside without us noticing. I rushed back into the store, scanning the aisles one last time. That's when I noticed something strange. A magazine rack near the counter. The magazines looked old, like they'd been sitting there for decades. I picked one up and my heart stopped. The date on the cover was 1998. I dropped the magazine immediately, feeling cold sweat on my skin. Something was seriously wrong with this place. I bolted out of the store, my voice trembling with panic. "We have to go! Sam!" Sam frowned. "What's wrong? Where's Sarah?" "She's not in the store. She's vanished." Sam stared at me in disbelief. "How can she just vanish?" "She's not there," I insisted. The discomfort spread through the group. Sarah couldn't have simply disappeared. The lights over the pumps intensified, then suddenly flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The gas station was plunged into total darkness. Sam didn't ask any more questions. He threw the gas nozzle down, and we all ran back to the car. Just as Sam turned the key in the ignition, something caught my attention at the edge of the parking lot. A figure standing there, barely visible in the shadows. I couldn't make out a face or details, but it was there, watching us, waiting. Sam slammed the accelerator. The tires squealed as we launched back onto the highway. No one spoke as he drove us at high speed. Fear was a knot in our throats. We kept driving for an hour. Finally, the GPS came back to life. It guided us to a motel down the road. We checked in, still shaking from what had happened. But then, something else happened. At 3 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text message from Sarah. "Where are you guys?" I shot up in bed. I replied immediately. "Where are you? What happened at the gas station?" Her answer came almost instantly. "What gas station?" My blood ran cold. I texted back, explaining what had happened. Her response took a little longer to arrive. "I never went with you. I went to the motel early. I've been here the whole time." The phone fell from my hands. It couldn't be possible. We all saw her enter the gas station. We all saw her. I ran to Sam's room and woke him up. "Sarah is here. She says she never was at the gas station." He blinked at me, confused. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know," I whispered. The next morning, we found Sarah sitting in the motel cafe. She looked perfectly normal. She swore to us that she never left the motel, that she had gone to sleep early, tired of waiting for us to get gas. Nothing made sense. It was as if the night at the gas station had never happened, except we all remembered it, except I could still see that figure in my mind, standing at the edge of the lot, watching us, waiting.
I have always liked silence, that kind of calm that settles over a place when the world feels far away, when the only sounds are the occasional whisper of leaves and the soft hum of crickets. My farm, located in the middle of nowhere, gave me that peace. I had no neighbors for miles, just open fields, a few animals, and an endless sky. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in your thoughts and let the stress of the world fade away. But sometimes that silence can turn against you. Sometimes it can be suffocating, isolating in a way that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I learned this the hard way. It all started with small things, insignificant things, or at least that's what I told myself. First, it was the animals, my goats in particular. They used to gather around the barn at night, but lately they were bunching up near the fence, bleating nervously as if something had frightened them. I assumed it was just a coyote or some other predator lurking around, nothing out of the ordinary. But then it started happening during the day. The goats would huddle in the center of their pen, eyes wide open, staring at something in the distance, something I couldn't see. I walked the perimeter of the property, looking for signs of danger, tracks, claw marks, anything. But there was nothing out of place, no sign that anything had been there.
I convinced myself it was nothing. Living in a place like this, you have to. You can't let every strange noise or shadow get to you, or you'll end up going crazy. So I let it go and stuck to my routine. Then one night, I was woken by a sound, a knock against the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe a loose shutter. But as I lay there in the dark listening, I realized it was too deliberate. There was a pattern to it, like someone or something was knocking. I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a flashlight and moved through the house as quietly as I could. The knocking continued, slow and steady. It was coming from the back door. I hesitated for a second. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back. But this was my house. I wasn't going to let some random noise drive me away. I unlatched the door and yanked it open, shining the flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. Just the empty backyard, the silhouette of the barn in the distance, the wind murmuring through the trees. I stood there for a minute, scanning the area, my heart still racing. The air felt heavy, dense, as if the night itself were pressing against me. But there were no signs of anyone, no footprints in the dirt. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have been a loose branch or some debris blown by the wind. I closed the door and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, I found the back door open. I hadn't noticed it in the haze of the night, but now it was wide open, gently swaying in the breeze. My stomach twisted. I always locked the door at night, always checked it. The lock wasn't broken, it wasn't forced. It was as if someone had opened it and simply left it that way. That's when I started to feel it, that persistent sensation in the back of my mind, the feeling that someone was watching me. At first, it was just a fleeting thought, easy to ignore, but the more I tried to dismiss it, the stronger it became. Days passed and small things started happening. Tools weren't where I'd left them. Doors and gates were open for no reason. Sometimes I barely noticed footprints in the dirt near the barn. The animals were still restless. My dog, usually so calm and friendly, began growling at nothing, his hackles raised, staring at the tree line. One afternoon, just before dusk, I was out in the field repairing a section of fence that had fallen. As I worked, I felt it again, that feeling, that sharp stab of uncomfort, like someone was watching me. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, far enough away that I couldn't make out details, but close enough to know it was there. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I waited for it to move, to say something, but it just stood there, motionless, watching me. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. I slowly stood up, grabbing my tools, pretending nothing was wrong, and as I walked back towards the house, I didn't take my eyes off it. I couldn't. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it must have been a trick of the light, maybe a shadow among the trees. Maybe, but deep down, I knew the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside kept me on edge. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the knocking to return. But it didn't. What came was worse. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not inside the house, outside, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the house. I got out of bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I crawled to the window and pulled the curtain aside just a little. At first, I saw nothing, just the yard bathed in moonlight, the barn in the distance, the wind murmuring through the trees. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw movement, a figure walking slowly, casually towards the back of the house. I dropped to the floor, my skin crawling. This was real. Someone was out there walking across my property as if it belonged to them. I crawled to the door, trying not to make a sound. I didn't want to alert it, but I needed to know if it was still there. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock. I opened the door just a crack, enough to look outside. The figure was closer now, about 20 meters away. In the moonlight, its silhouette was clearer, tall, wearing a long coat, but I couldn't see its face. It was as if the darkness itself clung to it. It wasn't hurrying, it wasn't running, it just walked, as if it knew I was watching and didn't care. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it as best I could. My body was shaking so badly I could barely secure the lock. I spent the next hour sitting in the kitchen, clutching my phone, even though I knew I had no signal. I thought about running, getting in the car and driving to town, but the idea of being out there with that thing made my blood run cold. Eventually, the footsteps faded away. I don't know how much time passed, but when I finally worked up the courage to look outside again, the yard was empty, the figure was gone, but the back door was open again. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt. They circled the house, led to the back door, and then vanished into the forest. The fence was open, swaying in the breeze like an invitation. That was the last straw. I decided not to stay and wait for whatever was out there. I called a friend in the city and asked to stay with him for a few days, just to clear my head, to get away. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was overreacting. But as I packed my things, I found something that made me realize it was all real. On the doormat by the door was one of my tools, a hammer I hadn't touched in weeks, placed carefully at the entrance, like a gift, like a message, as if someone were telling me, I'm here. I spent the next few nights at my friend's place trying to make sense of what had happened. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? There was no crime, no damage, nothing stolen, just the unsettling feeling of being watched, of being waited for. When I finally returned to the farm, I hoped the fear would be gone, but the moment I stepped out of the car, I knew nothing had changed. The animals were still nervous, my dog still growled at the tree line, and on the porch there was another gift, this time a small pile of stones, neatly stacked, no footprints around them. No sign of who had put them there. Just another warning. I don't know who or what is out there, but I know one thing for certain. I am not alone. And in the stillness of the farm, the silence has never been louder.
Do you know those long stretches of highway where the road disappears into the horizon and there's nothing but darkness ahead of you? During the day, they're unsettling enough, but at night, they become something else entirely. The loneliness, the silence, the way the road seems to swallow you whole. I've driven countless roads in the dead of night, but after that experience, I learned to watch for more than just the road. It was late autumn, and I was returning from a work trip that had dragged on longer than expected. By the time I finally got on the highway, night had fully fallen. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. I wasn't worried about driving at night. I had coffee in my thermos, music playing softly, and an empty road ahead of me. The first few hours were calm, just me and the road. The dark sky above, trees lining both sides of the highway, motionless in the night. But then, something changed. It started with lights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of them, just a pair of headlights in the distance, probably another car or a truck coming up behind me. But as the minutes passed, I noticed something strange. The lights weren't getting closer, and they weren't falling back either. They stayed right there at the same distance, no matter my speed. I sped up a little just to see what would happen. The lights did the same, always the same distance, always following me. A chill ran down my spine. The road was completely empty. There was no reason for someone to stay perfectly behind me, matching my every move. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Something wasn't right. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a truck using cruise control. Maybe the driver was tired and didn't want to pass me. but the longer it went on, the stronger the feeling of unease became. After a while, I decided to do something. The next exit led to a rest area. If I pulled off and stopped there, the other car would have to pass me, and then I'd see who the hell had been following me. I signaled and took the exit. The rest area was small and deserted. A few street lights illuminated the cracked asphalt. There were no other cars. I parked and turned off the engine, waiting, watching. But the lights never passed. I looked back toward the highway, expecting to see the headlights continue on their way, but there was nothing. The car that had been following me was gone. The cold along my spine intensified. That made no sense. There was no other exit on that stretch of road, no other path it could have taken. It had simply vanished, as if it had never been there. My breathing quickened. I didn't stay to find out more. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, driving faster this time. But the fear didn't fade. After a few miles, the lights appeared again in my rearview mirror, at the same distance, always following me. I stopped trying to rationalize it. I stopped trying to understand. I just drove faster. No matter how fast I went, the lights were always there. Until, in a moment of desperation, I slammed on the brakes. The screech Tereday screeched to a halt in the middle of the road. And then the lights went out. They didn't pull away. They didn't pass me. They simply disappeared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I only knew one thing. I was not alone on that road. I never had been. And since that night, every time I drive in the dark, I check my rearview mirror, because I know those lights could appear again, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And if they ever do, I won't stop again.
There is something unsettling about being deep in the forest, miles and miles away from any other person, just endless trees in every direction. Some people find it peaceful. I've always found it disturbing, as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But that's hiking. You push aside the discomfort because the adventure is worth it. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. I wasn't a beginner. I'd been hiking for years, from short walks to multi-day treks. This time was supposed to be simple, a one-night trip in a national park I already knew. I packed my gear, the weather was perfect, the trail was well marked, nothing out of the ordinary. I set out early in the morning. The cool air filled my lungs as I walked. Trees towered around me, their green leaves filtering the sunlight into soft patches on the forest floor. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves and the distant songs of birds. It was the kind of quiet I used to love, the kind of peace that made me feel at home. But as the day went on, that silence began to change. It wasn't sudden, just a gradual shift. The forest became too quiet. The birds stopped singing. The wind died down. It was as if nature itself had paused, as if something were watching. I told myself it was my imagination. Being alone in the middle of nowhere can do that to you. You start imagining things, turning every shadow into a threat. But even with that thought, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midday, I stopped in a small clearing. I sat on a fallen log, ate my lunch, and tried to relax. The sun was warm, and for a moment I felt the peace I'd been looking for. Until I heard it. My name whispered on the wind. At first, it was barely a murmur, so faint I almost dismissed it. But then it came again, clearer this time. Jason. I froze, my sandwich halfway to my mouth. The sound was soft and distant, as if someone were calling me from deep within the forest. I looked around, but I saw nothing, just trees and more trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the still air. Silence. I waited, but the whisper didn't return. I shook my head. It had to be the wind, or maybe the echo of some distant hiker, even though I hadn't seen anyone all day. I convinced myself it was nothing. I packed up my things and continued on the trail. But as I walked, the whispers returned. "Jason," insistent, closer. I stopped short, my heart pounding. The sound didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to surround me, as if the voice were coming from everywhere at once. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice tight with fear. Nothing, just the absolute silence of the forest. Cold sweat ran down my back. Every instinct told me to leave, to turn around, to get out of the forest as fast as possible. But I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind, or some strange echo effect. I kept walking, faster now. Every step felt heavy. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer. But the whispers didn't stop. "Jason, come here." My skin prickled. It didn't sound threatening, but there was something completely unnatural about it, almost hypnotic, as if it knew I couldn't ignore it. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, my fear grew. The trail felt narrower, the forest felt denser, the whispers grew more insistent. And then I saw it. A few meters off the trail, between the trees, stood a small, pale figure. At first, I thought it was a child, but when I focused, I knew it wasn't. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, cold, empty. I couldn't move. Fear locked my body in place. The whisper rang out again, clearer this time, from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Jason, come closer." My body reacted before my mind. I took a step back, then another. Sweat poured down my forehead. I didn't know what that thing was, but every fiber of my being told me to run. I spun on my heels and ran. The forest blurred around me. The trees seemed to close in. The whispers chased me. "Jason!" My breathing was ragged. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. I ran until I saw the park entrance. My car was there, waiting like salvation. I jumped inside, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The whisper stopped, but the fear didn't. I never returned to that park, or any other, because now I know the truth. The forest watches, and sometimes it calls your name.
I've always liked the loneliness of the open road. There's something about those long, empty stretches of highway that lets you clear your mind. It's as if the world disappears, and all that's left is you, your truck, and the hum of the engine. Some people hate it, the isolation, the endless hours with nothing but their own thoughts. But for me, it has always been a kind of peace. At least, that's what I believed. There's a route I've been driving for years. It's a nighttime run, and the road cuts through miles of empty desert. It's not a route many truckers want to take, especially at night. It's isolated, with barely any stops along the way, and it's known for being strange. At first, I didn't pay attention to the stories. I thought they were just exaggerated tales, things drivers told each other to pass the time. But now, I know better. The first time I felt that something wasn't right, I'd been driving for about an hour. The sun had set, leaving the sky pitch black, with only the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. The stretch of road I was on was known for being desolate. No buildings, no rest stops, just empty land as far as the eye could see. Even with the radio playing softly, a stillness began to settle in my chest, a feeling that I was the only one out there. I was driving, focused on the road, when my CB radio suddenly came to life. The burst of static was loud and abrupt, making me jump. I adjusted the dial, expecting it to be nothing more than interference, but the crackling continued, more persistent now. Then, through the noise, I heard a voice. At first, it was hard to make out, like someone whispering from miles away. but as I listened more closely, the words became clearer. "Breaker 99. Anyone out there?" I frowned, glancing at the CB. It wasn't unusual to hear other truckers on the channel, especially at night. But this voice was different. There was something off about it, something that sent a chill through me. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, my voice sounding too loud in the silent cab. For a moment, there was only more static. Then the voice came back, clearer this time. "Be careful at mile 223. Stay away from that stretch." I blinked in surprise. Mile 223 was about 20 kilometers ahead. I hadn't heard of any problems on the route, no road closures, no accidents. And who was this guy anyway? I hadn't passed another truck in hours. "Everything okay out there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Again, only static. I shook my head. Someone was probably playing a prank, some bored driver trying to mess with me. Still, there was something about the way that voice had sounded, so distant, so strange, that left me uneasy. As I approached mile 223, the road seemed to change. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow, and the darkness was deeper, as if my headlights couldn't cut through it the way they should. The hum of the engine, usually comforting, began to feel oppressive. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:17 a.m., the other hour, as some people call it. I kept my eyes on the road, expecting to see something, anything out of the ordinary. But it was the same endless highway, mile after mile of black asphalt stretching into the distance. Nothing ahead, nothing behind. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of shadows in my peripheral vision, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. There was someone standing on the side of the road, right at mile 223. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. It was a tall figure, motionless, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. As I approached, the silhouette became clearer. It was a man. He was wearing a dusty jacket and worn jeans. His face was hidden in the shadows. But there was something about the way he stood there, so still, so unnaturally motionless, that my stomach churned. I considered stopping. Maybe he needed help. But something inside me screamed not to. There was no reason anyone should be out there, in the middle of nowhere, at that hour of the night. No broken down cars, no signs of an accident. And yet there he was, waiting, or maybe watching. I kept my foot on the gas and didn't stop. As I passed him, something inside me tightened. I didn't look at him directly, but I watched him in my side mirror. He didn't move a single muscle. He just stood there, staring in my direction as I drove away. My knuckles went white from gripping the steering wheel. Fear crawled up my spine, making every hair on my body stand on end. I kept driving, trying to ignore the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. For miles, I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see him again. But the road behind me was empty. I shook my head, trying to convince myself he was just some random man, a stranded traveler in the worst possible place. But then the CB radio crackled again. The same voice as before. "You saw him." My throat went dry. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. A long pause, only static. Then the voice returned, softer this time. "They say he's been there for years." A chill ran through me. "Who?" I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The static grew louder, as if the signal were failing. And then, just before the radio went dead, the voice said 3 more words. "Don't stop." The rest of the drive was a blur of fear and paranoia. I didn't see the figure again. I didn't hear the voice again. but the tightness in my chest didn't ease until I was miles away. When I finally reached my destination, the sun was already rising. I parked the truck, shut off the engine, and sat there for a long time trying to process what had happened. I thought about asking other truckers if they'd ever seen anything at mile 223, but something stopped me. Maybe the fear of sounding crazy, or maybe the fear that someone might tell me the truth. Since then, I've driven that route many times, but never at night. And every time I pass mile 223, I can't help but glance towards the side of the road, half expecting to see that figure again. Because the problem isn't that I don't know who he was. The problem is, part of me is afraid he's still there, waiting.
There's something about being completely off the grid that excites me and terrifies me at the same time. The idea of leaving behind the chaos of the world, no phones, no internet, just pure, untouched nature, has always been one of the main reasons I love camping. But there's a dark side to that isolation, a part of it that reveals itself when the sun goes down and you're left alone in the darkness. That's when nature stops feeling so peaceful. It had been a long time since I'd gone camping, so when my friend invited me, I said yes. Alex suggested a weekend trip to some remote mountains, and I didn't hesitate to accept. Just the two of us, a couple of tents, and the quiet of nature. The place was perfect, miles from the nearest town, deep inside a national forest where few people ventured. No campgrounds, no RVs, just us in the wild. The drive was long and winding, the kind where with every mile you see fewer signs of civilization. Eventually, the paved road turned to gravel, and after an hour, even the gravel disappeared. From there, the journey continued on foot along a difficult trail, but that was exactly what we wanted: isolation. We set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The air was cool and pleasant in the afternoon, and everything felt perfect. No city noise, no distractions, just the whisper of the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a bird in the distance. As the sun began to set, we lit a campfire, cooked dinner, and settled in for the night. We talked, laughed, and drank a few beers while the firelight cast long shadows across the trees. Everything was exactly how camping should be. But then, just as the conversation started to die down, we heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from the forest. At first, I thought it was an animal. After all, we were in the middle of nowhere, so it made sense that wildlife would be nearby. But the sound was rhythmic, too steady to be an animal moving through the bushes. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another. Nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another. Nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another. Nothing important.
but the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Every few minutes it changed location, as if something or someone was circling our camp. I looked at Alex and noticed he was tense too, his eyes darting nervously, scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, listening closely. The tapping continued, soft but persistent, like someone hitting a stick against a tree. It seemed to come from different directions, moving from one side of the clearing to the other. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Probably the wind, or maybe a branch knocking against another, nothing important. But the sound didn't stop. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder.
I've always liked driving at night. There's something relaxing about the world after dark, when traffic disappears, when the roads become yours alone. The hum of the engine, the glow of the dashboard, it's my kind of therapy. But there's also something unsettling about the night, something you learn when you spend too much time alone on the road. I learned it the hard way. It was late summer. I had left a friend's house late and decided to take an alternate route home, the scenic route, as I like to call it. A rural road cutting through fields and forests. No street lights, no traffic, just darkness. I had driven it many times before, but that night felt different. I remember glancing at the clock as I turned onto the road, 12:30 a.m. The sky was clear, the low moon casting a pale glow over the fields. I rolled down the windows, letting the night breeze fill the car, and put on some soft music on the radio. Everything was perfect, until I saw the lights. At first, I thought they were reflections in the sky, maybe the glow of a distant farm. But no, they weren't streetlights or house lights. They were something else. There were 3 lights floating over a field beside the road, moving, swaying, changing in intensity. A pale blue light flickering in a way that made my skin crawl. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road. I shut off the engine and stepped out of the car. The world was completely silent. The wind gently stirred the cornfields. No insects, no birds. Just the lights watching me. For a moment, I wanted to walk toward them, but a primitive instinct inside me screamed, "Don't go closer." The lights hovered over the field, slowly descending and then rising again, as if they were searching for something, or someone. And then, without warning, they stopped and turned toward me. A cold chill ran down my spine, a fear I couldn't explain. The lights began to move, not drifting randomly, not erratic. They were moving toward me, advancing with terrifying precision. My throat went dry, my pulse raced. I jumped back into the car and slammed the door shut, turning the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. The lights were closer now. I could see their blue glow reflecting off the windshield. I floored the accelerator. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I shot down the road. My mind raced. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror, but I did. And there they were. The lights followed me, keeping pace with my car. They made no sound. They didn't flicker. They just floated, pursuing me. Every curve I took, every change in speed, they stayed there. I couldn't escape. Then, suddenly, they vanished. I checked the mirror again. Only darkness. Only the empty road behind me. My chest rose and fell as I struggled to catch my breath. I pulled over at the first safe place I could find, got out of the car, and looked toward the field. Nothing. Just the night. But something told me those lights were still out there, waiting. Since then, I've never taken that road at night again. I don't want to know what they were. I don't want to know what they wanted. Only I know that if I ever see those lights in my rearview mirror again, I won't stop. I won't look back. Because some things belong to the darkness.
Road trips are supposed to be fun. Windows down, music blasting, miles of open road ahead. I've always loved that feeling of freedom, the idea that you can go anywhere, do anything, without answering to anyone but yourself. But after what happened to me last summer, I don't think I'll ever feel that carefree on the road again. There's a kind of danger out there, the kind you don't see coming until it's too late. It was supposed to be a short solo trip. I had a couple of days off work and thought I'd take advantage of them by driving north and spending some time in a small cabin I'd rented. The place was isolated, hidden in the woods, perfect for a brief escape from city life. Just me, a few books, and a few days of peace. The drive started out perfectly. Clear skies, open highway, and nothing but the sound of my favorite playlist filling the car. I felt good, excited even. I hadn't taken a break in months, and this felt like the perfect way to disconnect. The highway stretched out in front of me, and for the first few hours, everything went according to plan. But then, somewhere along a deserted stretch of road, I noticed something strange in my rearview mirror. I saw an old, beat-up van following me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual to have a car behind you on the highway, and there were long stretches where you wouldn't see another vehicle for miles. However, after about 20 minutes of driving, the van was still there, keeping a constant distance. I glanced at the speedometer. I wasn't going particularly fast, just cruising at the speed limit, but the van didn't seem interested in passing me, even though the road was empty. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that maybe they were heading in the same direction. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Something about the way the van followed me felt off. It stayed at the same distance, never speeding up, never slowing down, just matching my pace in a way that felt deliberate. I told myself I was overreacting. I'd been on the road for a while. Maybe I was just tired, getting a little paranoid. Still, the longer I drove, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to test a theory. I sped up slightly, pushing a few kilometers per hour over the limit, just to see if the van would do the same. It did. The van matched my speed perfectly, keeping that same constant distance behind me. That's when I really started to worry. I checked my phone, no signal, of course. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. The road stretched out in front of me, empty except for me and that van. I turned off the music, and the silence inside the car suddenly felt heavy. I needed to figure out how to get out of this. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But what if it wasn't? After a few more minutes of driving, I saw an exit sign ahead. It wasn't for a town, just a small rest area, one of those roadside stops with a couple of picnic tables and a bathroom. I figured if I pulled over, the van would pass by and I'd be able to see whether they were really following me or if it had all been a coincidence. I signaled and took the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. The rest area was deserted, not a single car in sight. I parked and waited, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror.
The van didn't pass. Instead, it slowed down and took the same exit. A wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't just another driver going the same way. I was being followed. The van stopped at the far end of the parking lot, a good distance from my car. For a moment, everything was still. I watched it, my pulse racing, but no one got out. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. I sat there for a few minutes, debating what to do. I didn't want to get out of the car, not with that van there, not knowing who or what was inside. But I didn't want to sit there either, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, I decided the best option was to leave, get back on the road, and try to lose them. Maybe if I kept driving, they'd get bored and give up. Maybe they just wanted to scare me for some reason. But the thought of that van following me all the way to the cabin made my skin crawl. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I merged back onto the highway, I kept checking the rearview mirror, praying the van would stay behind. It didn't. It followed me back onto the road, maintaining that same steady distance. My heart was pounding now. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever was in that van was following me, and they weren't giving up. I pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring as I sped down the empty highway. The van matched my speed, never falling back, never trying to pass me. I was trapped in some kind of twisted game, and I had no idea how to escape it. I saw another exit ahead, this one leading to a small town. I took it, hoping that if I drove into a more populated area, they'd back off. I needed a gas station, a cafe, anywhere with people, anywhere safe. I entered the town, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The van followed, still keeping its distance, trailing me as I turned down side streets, trying to lose it. Eventually, I spotted a gas station at the edge of town. It was small, but there were a few cars parked outside and a couple of people inside. I pulled in, parking right by the entrance, and hurried inside. The cashier looked at me strangely, probably because I looked like I was on the verge of a panic attack. I tried to calm myself, to act like everything was normal, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows, searching for the van. It didn't pull into the gas station. Instead, it drove slowly past the front, its tinted windows reflecting the store's lights. I watched it disappear down the road, finally out of sight. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe they realized I wasn't an easy target and decided to move on. I stayed at the gas station for a while, buying a drink and chatting with the cashier to steady my nerves. When I finally felt ready, I went back to my car, scanning the road for the van. Nothing. The rest of the drive to the cabin, my heart kept pounding. I constantly checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see the van appear again, but it never did. When I arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, and a wave of exhaustion hit me. The place was as peaceful as I'd imagined, tucked away in the woods, with nothing but the sound of trees swaying in the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see that van parked in the driveway, waiting. I spent the next 2 days at the cabin trying to relax, but I never truly felt safe. Every time I heard a car pass on the distant road, my heart would race, and I'd peer out the window, bracing for the worst. When it was time to head home, I took a different route. I never saw the van again, and I haven't seen it since. But the experience stayed with me. I don't know who was in that van or what they wanted. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, trying to scare me for fun. But whatever their intention was, it worked. I've never felt comfortable on a road trip again. Now, every time I drive alone, I find myself checking the rearview mirror, looking for that same old beat-up van. And every time I see a car following me for more than a few miles, my heart skips a beat, because you never know who's out there, watching, waiting.
I used to think forests were places of peace and tranquility, an escape from the world where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional song of a bird. But after what happened to me last fall, I know the truth. There are things in the forest that shouldn't be there,
things you can't explain, and once you sense them, the peace of the forest is never the same again. It was mid-October, and I had taken a solo trip to a cabin deep in the mountains, the kind of trip I took every year to disconnect from the world and enjoy the fresh air and the changing leaves. The cabin was small, just one room with a bed, a wood-burning stove, and a porch overlooking a dense pine forest. There was no electricity, no cell signal, just me and nature. I arrived in the afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains. The air was cold and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I lit a fire in the stove, made myself a coffee, and settled in. It was perfect. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But when night fell and the cabin was wrapped in darkness, I decided to go for a walk. I had explored the area on previous trips, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. The forest was familiar to me. I had always found comfort in its silence. But that night, something changed. At first, it was just a whisper, so faint I barely noticed it. I thought it was the wind, but the more I listened, the clearer it became that they were words. I couldn't understand them. They were just there, right at the edge of my hearing. I stopped short, shining my flashlight in every direction. The trees stood motionless, dark against the night sky, but the whisper continued. It was as if someone were speaking in the wind. "Hello?" I called out, feeling ridiculous. No one answered, only the whisper. Then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. I didn't see it clearly, just a glimpse of something too tall to be human, gliding silently among the trunks. My heart stopped. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The figure didn't walk, it floated. The whisper grew louder, more desperate, like hundreds of voices speaking to me all at once. I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran toward the cabin, the sound of those whispers chasing me. When I reached it, I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my back against the wall, my body tense. Inside the cabin, the silence was thick. I could hear my own breathing. But outside, the forest was silent too. Too silent. There was no wind, no cracking branches, no distant hoot of a night owl, just a terrifying emptiness, as if everything were waiting. I didn't turn on any more lights. I didn't want to draw the attention of whatever was out there. With every passing minute, I felt the pressure in the air grow, as if the walls of the cabin were holding back something invisible and ancient. My mind tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was just a shadow caused by my flashlight. Maybe it was an animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something in the forest, something that had seen me, and something that didn't want me there. I stayed awake the rest of the night, my eyes fixed on the door, afraid it would open on its own at any moment. But nothing happened. There were no more whispers, no more movements in the darkness, just a terrible, absolute silence. When the sun finally began to rise through the trees, I felt like I had spent an eternity in that cabin. As soon as there was enough light, I packed my things as fast as I could. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't stop to admire the scenery. I just wanted to leave. Before I left, I paused on the porch and looked at the forest one last time. The place looked different in the daylight, but not in a comforting way. It looked empty, not like a normal forest, but as if something that should have been there was no longer present, as if the entire place had changed overnight. A chill ran through me. I didn't stay any longer. I got in the car and drove away without looking back. It's been months since that night, and I haven't returned to that forest. I'm not sure I ever will, because every time I close my eyes, I can still see the shadow moving between the trees. Every time I hear the wind whisper through the leaves, I feel like it's trying to tell me something. And every time someone tells me that forests are calm and peaceful, I want to warn them of the truth. Forests are not empty. They never have been. And if you ever find yourself on a lonely trail in the middle of nowhere and you start to hear whispers in the wind, don't ignore them. Because sometimes the forest is warning you, and sometimes it's better not to discover what's out there.
I used to think picking up hitchhikers was one of those old-fashioned things, a kind of road adventure people used to have when the world seemed a little less dangerous. But after what happened to me on that lonely stretch of road, I no longer stop for anyone. I learned the hard way that not everything and not everyone is what it seems. It was late October. I was traveling alone on a long road trip through the middle of nowhere. I had taken a detour off the highway to explore some scenic back roads, an empty, winding road that cut through fields and forests, the kind of place where you might not see another car for miles. Perfect for clearing your head, or so I thought. The sun had just set, painting the sky a pale pink. I'd been driving for hours, and the fatigue was beginning to settle into my bones. My destination was still a couple of hours away, but I wasn't in a hurry. With my favorite playlist playing in the background, I planned to stop in the next town to stretch my legs, grab something to eat, and maybe find a cheap motel for the night. And then I saw him. He appeared out of nowhere, standing on the side of the road with his thumb out, a small bag slung over his shoulder. There was something about him that felt out of place, like he didn't belong on that lonely stretch of road. He wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to see hitchhiking. He wasn't disheveled or dirty. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, well-dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt. His expression was calm, almost serene. I slowed down as I approached, debating with myself, but something about him seemed safe, even harmless. Probably a college student stranded and trying to get to the next town. Besides, there were no gas stations or stops nearby. It felt cruel to leave him there alone with night falling. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Where are you headed?" I asked. He stepped closer with a faint, grateful smile. "I just want to get to the next town," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "I've been walking for quite a while." There was something in the way he spoke, polite, respectful. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Get in." He slid into the passenger seat and carefully placed his bag at his feet. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced at him. He was quiet, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. There was nothing particularly strange about him, just a guy having bad luck and accepting a ride. The first few miles passed in silence. The road stretched ahead of us, long and dark, with only the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. From time to time, I tried to make small talk to ease the awkwardness. "So, where are you from?" He shrugged. "Here and there. I've been moving around a lot lately." "I get it. Life on the road can be freeing." The hitchhiker turned his head slightly, without taking his eyes off the horizon. "Yes, but sometimes it feels like you're running from something, or chasing something. It depends on how you look at it." His words hung in the air. I wasn't sure how to respond. There was something in his tone, something heavy, as if he wasn't just talking about travel. I didn't push it. I kept my eyes on the road as the night grew deeper. The sky was clear, the stars blinking like holes in the darkness. The road remained empty, just the two of us, the sound of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires on asphalt. Then, suddenly, the hitchhiker spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Turn left here." I frowned and glanced at the GPS. There was no turn to the left, just a straight road for miles. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Left," he repeated, this time his voice lower, more insistent. I looked at him,
His expression had changed. Before, he'd seemed calm, almost relaxed. Now his face was tense, his eyes fixed on me. "I can't turn," I said, my voice shakier than I expected. "There's no road there." His jaw tightened. "Turn." The air in the car grew heavy, thick. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I looked back at the road, pure black, no exit, no sign of a turnoff, nothing. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not turning." The hitchhiker tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. Then, in a whisper, he said, "Then stop." Something in his tone made my entire body tense. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The car surged forward. "Get out!" I shouted, not daring to look at him. He didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his face blank. Fear wrapped around me like a second skin. I took a breath, trying to stay firm. "Get out of the car, now!" Nothing. He didn't blink. He didn't react. Then he smiled, slowly. He reached for the door handle. "All right." He opened the door and stepped out, moving as if the car weren't speeding down the road. The sound of the door slamming was like a gunshot in the night. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I kept driving. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Fear told me that if I did, he'd still be there, watching me, waiting. When I finally reached the next town, my hands were still shaking. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and tried to calm myself. Then I looked at the passenger seat. The bag was still there. My breath caught in my throat. With trembling fingers, I opened it. There was only one thing inside, a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. It had just 2 words in messy handwriting. "Thank you." My stomach dropped. I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't want to understand. Since then, I've never picked up anyone again. Because sometimes when you help someone on the road, you may not be helping a person at all.
You know those vacations that are supposed to be an escape from reality? A time to relax and leave your worries behind. That's exactly what I had in mind when I booked a 7-day cruise. I needed it, a break from work, from stress, from everything. The open ocean, the warm sun, a drink in my hand, it all sounded perfect. And at first, it was. The first few days were exactly what I expected. Mornings by the pool with a good book, nights enjoying the onboard entertainment with a cocktail in hand. I had chosen to travel alone, and it was just what I needed. Just me, the sea, and no distractions. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't until the 3rd day that I noticed something was wrong. My cabin had a private balcony. Every night I sat out there watching the stars. The sound of the waves was hypnotic, the gentle rocking of the ship strangely comforting. But that night I felt it, that unsettling, unmistakable feeling that I wasn't alone. You know that chill, that prickling at the back of your neck, like someone is watching you even when you can't see them. I turned my head, looking toward the nearby balconies. Nothing, just empty railings. I scanned the rows of cabins above and below mine. They were all dark, curtains closed. I laughed at myself. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe I was too caught up in my own head. I shook off the feeling and stayed outside for another hour before going to bed. The next morning, I forgot about it. Another perfect day on the ship. Breakfast by the pool, a nap in the sun, sea breeze. But later, as I was getting ready for dinner, something strange happened. I was brushing my hair in front of the mirror when I saw something through the glass door to the balcony. The curtains were slightly open, and there, standing just outside, was a figure. My heart lurched. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a reflection. Someone was on my balcony, watching me. My body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I convinced myself I was imagining it, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me.
But then it moved. Just slightly, a small shift, but enough to snap me out of it. I dropped the brush and ran to the door. My fingers were shaking as I yanked the handle and flung it open. But when I stepped outside, there was no one there. I leaned over the railing, scanning the nearby balconies. Nothing. The ship rolled gently, the wind tousled my hair, the ocean stretched in every direction, and I was alone. I went back into my cabin, slamming the door shut. My heart was pounding. What the hell had I seen? That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. The next night, the worst happened. When I returned for dinner, I found something disturbing. My balcony door was slightly open, but I had closed it. I always closed it. A wave of terror washed over me. I approached cautiously. The breeze stirred the curtains. Something was sitting on the small table on my balcony, an object that hadn't been there before. A matchbook. An old, worn matchbook, like the kind you get at roadside motels. I picked it up with trembling fingers. On the inside of the cover, something was written. The letters were crooked, almost illegible. They read, "I see you." I dropped the matchbook like it had burned my skin. Goosebumps rippled across my arms. Someone had been here. Someone had been inside my room. I rushed to close the door and lock it, grabbing my phone, ready to call security. But I stopped. What was I going to tell them? That I found a matchbook on my balcony? It didn't sound like an emergency. But I knew what I had seen. I knew someone had been there. I spent the rest of the night awake. Every creak of the ship, every shadow on the wall made me jump. Then, at 2 in the morning, I heard a sound. A soft tapping on the balcony. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. The sound continued, slow and rhythmic, like someone knocking. My breathing turned into a shallow whisper. Slowly, I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept toward the curtain. Every step made me feel weaker. The tapping continued. With one final breath, I pulled the curtain aside. The balcony was empty. The door was still closed. But there was something else. Something written on the glass. In the fog someone had left with their hand. 3 words. "Are you afraid?" I stumbled backward, my mind spinning, and collapsed onto the bed. I don't know how much time passed. When I woke, it was morning. The ship was still on course. The balcony looked normal. But the words were still there. That day, I avoided my room. I spent my time in the common areas, hoping the fear would fade. But it never did. I never went back out onto the balcony. I never looked out the window again. And every time I think about that cruise, I still hear that sound, that soft, insistent tapping on the glass. And I know that whatever found me out at sea is still out there, looking for someone else, waiting.
Do you know that feeling when you walk into a place and something just feels off? Like the air is a little too still, the shadows a little too dark, and you can't shake the sense that something is watching you even when you're alone. I never believed in those things before. I thought they were just superstitions, people reading too much into old stories or letting their imagination get the better of them. But after what happened in that cabin, I will never doubt that feeling again. It all started as a spontaneous weekend trip. My friend Sarah and I had been talking about getting out of the city for a while, just the two of us to relax and recharge. We found a cabin online advertised as rustic and off the grid. It sounded perfect for what we needed. It was also cheap, which should have been a warning sign, but we were eager to escape and didn't question the details too much. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through dense forests and narrow mountain roads. The farther we went, the more isolated everything felt. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked small and unassuming. It had the basics: a small kitchen, a wood-burning stove, 2 bedrooms, and a porch that overlooked the forest.
There was something charming about it in a neglected, forgotten way, but even in daylight I couldn't help feeling uneasy. The place felt empty. Not in the obvious sense, of course it was empty, no one had been there for months, but in a strange way, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. We unpacked our things, made a quick dinner, and settled in for the night. The sun had just set, and the only light came from the few candles we'd brought and the faint glow of the fire we lit in the stove. The cabin had no electricity, so once night fell, darkness completely wrapped around everything. That's when I noticed it for the first time. The silence wasn't the peaceful kind you feel when you're far from the city. It was heavy, almost unnatural, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you shouldn't make any sound, as if the air itself were holding its breath. I told myself it was just the isolation, maybe my mind playing tricks on me after the long drive, but the unease lingered, like an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch. Sarah didn't seem to notice. She was busy talking about her plans for the weekend, oblivious to the tension I felt. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the warmth of the fire and the comforting glow of the candles, but something about the cabin didn't feel right. After dinner, we sat on the porch for a while, listening to the wind moving through the trees. The moon was full, casting a ghostly glow over the forest, and for a moment I almost managed to relax. The beauty of the night was enough to make me forget the strange feeling that had been bothering me since we arrived. Then Sarah pointed something out. "Do you hear that?" she asked in a barely audible whisper. I listened, straining to hear what she meant. At first there was nothing, just the wind and the creaking of the trees. But then, very faintly, I heard it. A rhythmic, distant sound coming from somewhere deep in the forest. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked at Sarah uneasily. "What is that?" I asked, my voice tense. "I don't know," she replied, frowning. "Maybe an animal?" But the sound didn't feel like an animal. It was too steady, too deliberate. It reminded me of heavy, slow footsteps, as if someone or something were walking through the forest just out of sight. We listened for a while longer, but the sound never came closer. It stayed distant, low enough that you could almost mistake it for part of the wind if you weren't paying attention. Still, it left a cold knot in my stomach. We decided to go back inside and call it a night. Sarah brushed it off as nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like something was watching us, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. Inside the cabin, the feeling intensified. The fire in the stove had burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It grew stronger with every passing minute. By the time we went to bed, I was on full alert. The cabin was too quiet, too still, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I could hear Sarah's breathing from the other room, slow and steady, but I couldn't sleep. Then, at some point in the night, I heard it again. The tapping was louder now, closer. It echoed through the walls of the cabin. My heart raced as I lay completely still in bed, holding my breath, trying to pinpoint the sound. It seemed to be coming from outside, just behind the door. I slowly sat up, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sound continued, a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if something were walking around the cabin, circling it. I glanced toward the small window beside my bed, but the darkness was impenetrable. I could see the silhouettes of trees swaying in the breeze, but nothing else. And yet the sound was still there, surrounding us. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to make a sound. Something deep in my instincts told me I had to stay completely still. My mouth was dry, and I clutched the blanket tightly, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, not daring to breathe, every fiber of my being tense, waiting to hear something else. But nothing came. The air inside the cabin felt even heavier than before, as if the entire place were holding its breath with me. I don't know how long I stayed that way, maybe minutes, maybe hours, but at some point exhaustion overtook me and somehow I fell asleep. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the window. It took me a moment to remember where I was.
The oppression of the night before felt surreal, like a bad dream, but the lingering fear in my chest told me I hadn't imagined it. I got dressed quickly and stepped out onto the porch, scanning the forest. The trees were still there, tall and unmoving, as if nothing had happened. But then I saw them. Footprints in the dirt around the cabin. They didn't look like animal tracks, and they didn't look human either. They were long and thin with irregular marks, as if something heavy had dragged its feet through the damp soil. A chill ran through me. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. We packed our things and spent the morning exploring the area, trying to enjoy our last day. But I couldn't relax. Every time we passed a clearing that was too dark or a deep hollow in the ground, I felt like something was watching us. By the afternoon, we decided to head back to the city before it got dark. Sarah didn't argue about cutting the trip short. She said something about wanting time to start the week. I didn't question it. I was more than ready to leave. As we got into the car, I had looked back at the cabin one last time. In the daylight, it was just an old, neglected building in the middle of the forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, or maybe I could finally see the place for what it really was. We drove away down the dirt road, and when the cabin disappeared among the trees, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I don't know what was in that forest that night, and I don't want to know. But I will never go back to that cabin, and I will never ignore that feeling of unease again. Because sometimes it's not just your imagination. Sometimes there really is something in the shadows, watching, waiting.
I have never liked driving in fog. There is something about the way it wraps around everything, the way the world disappears beyond the hood of the car, that has always unsettled me. It makes everything seem emptier, more unreal. But no previous experience prepared me for what I lived through that night. I was driving back home after a work trip, crossing a rural area full of forests and hills. It was late. There were no streetlights, no phone signal, just me, my car, and the road. The fog had begun to appear slowly, but after a while it became so dense that I could barely see beyond my headlights. I turned off the radio to focus. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath the tires. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The fog felt heavy, oppressive. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the road. It was barely a shadow in the mist, motionless, arms hanging at its sides. My skin prickled. Who would be out there in the middle of nowhere at this hour? I slowed down, my headlights illuminating its silhouette. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing. I couldn't see his face. He didn't move. He didn't react. As I slowly passed him, I bit my lip. Should I stop? What if he needed help? Something inside me screamed, "Don't do it." I sped up slightly and drove on. I looked in the rearview mirror and almost screamed. The man was no longer at the side of the road. He was standing in the middle of the road, right behind my car, completely still. A wave of terror ran through my body. I slammed on the accelerator. The car roared as I drove away, the fog swallowing the figure, but the feeling that I wasn't alone didn't disappear. I looked in the rearview mirror once more, and there he was again. But now he was inside the car, sitting in the back seat. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't dare breathe. My eyes stayed locked on the road, fear rushing through me from head to toe. Suddenly, the radio turned on by itself, emitting a sharp burst of static. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't go on like this. I swerved the car sharply to the side of the road and spun around to face whatever was there. The back seat was empty. Nothing, except for a faint mark on the upholstery, as if someone had been sitting there. My heart pounded against my chest. I stepped on the gas and didn't stop until I reached the next town. When I finally pulled over in a well-lit area, I sat there trembling, trying to steady my breathing. I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, fatigue, the fog playing tricks on my mind.
But even today, every time I drive alone in the fog, I look in the rearview mirror with fear, because I know that if I ever see him again, this time he won't disappear.
They say that rest areas are some of the most unsettling places you can end up in late at night. I never believed it until it happened to me. I had stopped at many of them before without a second thought, to fill up with gas, buy a snack, stretch my legs. But that night, when I pulled into a rest area in the middle of nowhere, it felt different. And when I left, I knew I would never see them the same way again. I had been driving back home after visiting a friend in another state. It was a long trip, but I decided to do it in one go instead of stopping at a motel. It seemed like a good idea at the time, until I had been on the road for hours, the darkness closing in around me and exhaustion weighing heavily on my eyelids. It was past midnight, and I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Just me, the open road, and the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. I could feel sleep starting to win, my focus slipping. I knew I needed to take a break before I fell asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw the sign for a rest area a few miles ahead. It was nothing special, just one of those small pull-offs with a couple of vending machines and a bathroom, but it was better than nothing. I took the exit and pulled into the nearly empty rest area. There was only one other car in the parking lot, an old beat-up sedan parked near the entrance. I didn't see its owner anywhere. The air felt heavy, the kind of stillness you only find in places forgotten by time. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a moment, listening to the hum of the motor fading and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. The other car remained motionless. Its windows were fogged up. I wondered if someone was sleeping inside or if it had been abandoned. The parking lot was dimly lit by a couple of flickering streetlights, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt. Something about the place made me uneasy, but I convinced myself it was just paranoia. I only needed to stretch a bit and clear my head. I stepped out of the car, feeling the cool air against my skin, and walked toward the vending machines. My footsteps sounded far too loud in the silence. When I reached them, I noticed something strange. The machines were completely dead, as if they hadn't worked in years. I sighed in frustration. The thought of a cold soda had been keeping me going, and now I'd have to continue without it. I turned back toward my car, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing next to the old sedan. I hadn't seen him before. He was tall, wearing dark, worn-looking clothes that made it hard to see clearly in the low light. But there was something deeply unsettling about his posture. He was too still. His face was turned toward me, but he stood just outside the glow of the streetlight, making his features impossible to make out. A chill ran through me. I hadn't heard him approach. I hadn't seen him when I arrived. It was as if he had always been there, watching me. My stomach twisted with unease. Not wanting to seem paranoid, I gave him a slight nod, just enough to acknowledge his presence without looking nervous. He didn't move. He didn't nod back. He didn't gesture. He just stood there, completely motionless, staring at me. I tried to ignore him and hurried back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what that guy's problem was, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. When I reached my car door, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder. The man was still there, but now he was closer. Not by much, maybe only a couple of steps, but enough to send my pulse racing. I shoved the key into the lock with trembling hands, overwhelmed by an irrational urgency to get inside and lock the doors as fast as possible. When I finally got in, I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. The sound shattered the suffocating silence of the parking lot. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. I took a shaky breath and prepared to back out, when something in the rearview mirror made me freeze.
There was movement in the back seat. Someone was in my car. My blood turned to ice. A dark figure, barely visible in the shadows, was crouched in the back seat, as if it had been hiding there the entire time. How had it gotten in? How long had it been there? My thoughts spiraled into chaos. Before I could react, the figure moved. It slowly straightened, its silhouette becoming clearer in the mirror. That's when I saw its face, or rather, the absence of one. It was blurred, indistinct, like a shadow that hadn't fully taken shape. A shudder ran through me from head to toe. It wasn't breathing, it wasn't speaking, it was just staring at me through the reflection. Panic hit me at once. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the car shot out of the rest area. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the man was still there. I didn't want to know if the figure in the back seat was still with me. I drove for miles without stopping, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breathing ragged with fear. I couldn't process what I had seen. I didn't want to, yet I could still feel it, as if something invisible was still in the car with me. After what felt like hours, I saw the sign for a brightly lit gas station and turned in without hesitation. The parking lot was full of cars, people coming and going. For the first time all night, I felt safe. I parked under the brightest light I could find and shut off the engine. My hands were still shaking. I knew I had to look. I had to see if the back seat was empty. I swallowed hard and slowly turned my head. The back seat was empty. I let out a shaky relief of relief, but the fear didn't fully fade. I stayed at the gas station for a long time, trying to convince myself it had all been a hallucination caused by exhaustion, just a trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I saw in that rearview mirror wasn't my imagination. Someone or something was in my car that night. I never went back to that rest area. In fact, I don't stop at any of them anymore when I drive at night, because whatever was waiting for me there that night, I never want to encounter it again. And if you ever find yourself alone at one of those isolated rest areas in the middle of the night, and you feel like someone is watching you, take my advice. Leave.
There's something about road trips that makes you feel invincible. The miles of asphalt stretching out in front of you, the freedom of having no fixed plan, the thrill of the unknown. I've always loved that feeling, knowing that anything can happen. But this trip crossed the line between adventure and something else, something I still can't explain. Dylan and I had been planning this trip for weeks, just two friends crossing the country with no set destination, no schedules, just us, the car, and the road. It was supposed to be fun, spontaneous, but at some point, everything went wrong. We were driving through the middle of nowhere, an endless stretch of highway where there was nothing but flat fields and a few scattered trees as far as the eye could see. The kind of place where you lose cell signal and feel completely disconnected from the world. The sun was beginning to set, staining the sky purple, and we hadn't seen another car in miles. I was at the wheel, my vision starting to blur after so many hours of driving. Dylan was checking the GPS, looking for the next town, or at least a gas station where we could refuel and stretch our legs. "Anything nearby?" I asked, without taking my eyes off the road. "Nothing in the next 50 kilometers, he replied, frowning. "But there's a gas station about 5 kilometers off the main road. It's pretty far out, only about a 10-minute detour." I nodded. "Let's go there. We need gas." We took the exit and followed a narrow, winding road that cut through fields and small clusters of trees. The farther we went, the more isolated everything felt. There were no streetlights, no signs of life, just the beam of our headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was in terrible condition, full of cracks and potholes, as if it hadn't been repaired in years. After about 10 minutes, we finally saw it,
an old, run-down gas station by the side of the road. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the night. The building looked abandoned, paint peeling from the walls, windows coated in grime, and the lights above the pumps barely glowing. There was only one car in the parking lot, an old rusted sedan parked near the entrance. "I've got a bad feeling about this place," Dylan muttered, glancing around. "Yeah, it's definitely not 5-star, I admitted, but we don't have a choice. We needed gas, and there wasn't another station for miles." I parked next to one of the pumps and shut off the engine. The air outside was strangely cold, biting to the bone despite it being summer. I told Dylan to go buy some food while I filled the tank. As I started pumping gas, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I looked around, but the outside of the station was empty, just the dark road and the flickering lights of the building. The only sound was the soft hum of the pump. After a minute, I heard the bell above the store door ring as Dylan went inside. I stayed outside, staring at the old, rusted sedan. It was empty, its windows fogged and covered in dust, as if it hadn't moved in years. When the tank was full, I put the nozzle back and looked toward the station. Dylan still hadn't come out. I frowned. What was taking him so long? Maybe he was deciding what to buy, but something about this place made my nerves crawl. I decided to go inside and see what was going on. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt it. The air inside was heavy, loaded with an uncomfortable silence. The place was poorly lit, with dusty shelves and expired products. The smell of mold filled the room. The floor creaked under my boots as I walked. "Dylan?" I called. Nothing. I kept moving, walking down the aisles. The place wasn't big, but it felt badly designed, as if the shelves had been placed with no logic at all. It was unsettling. I headed to the counter. An old man sat behind it, hunched over with his head down. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and he wore a faded flannel shirt. He didn't react when I approached. "Excuse me, did you see my friend come in here?" Nothing. "Hello?" I insisted. The old man slowly raised his head. When his eyes met mine, a chill ran down my spine. They were glassy, empty, as if he wasn't seeing anything at all. His lips parted slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no sound came out. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. Something very wrong. I looked around the store again, searching for Dylan. "Dylan!" I called once more, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. Nothing. Anxiety hit me hard. I turned and started walking quickly down the aisles, checking every corner of the store, but there was no sign of him. It was impossible. He hadn't left. I would have seen him. Then I heard a creaking sound coming from the back of the store. I froze and slowly turned my head. A dark aisle stretched beyond the shelves, a space I hadn't noticed before. There was no light at the end, just shadows. And then a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Dylan. But something was wrong. He moved in a strange way, stiff, as if every step took an enormous effort. His expression was empty, his eyes dull. "Dylan," I whispered, feeling a shiver run through me. He didn't respond. He just kept walking toward the exit, completely ignoring me. I tried to block his path, grabbing his arm. His skin was cold, too cold. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stopped for a moment, but he didn't answer. He didn't look at me. He just pulled free from my grip and kept walking toward the car. I followed him, my heart hammering in my chest. Dylan got into the driver's seat and started the engine without even looking back. I got into the passenger seat, still in shock. The car roared to life, and Dylan sped out of the gas station without even looking back. The drive back to the highway was absolute silence. Dylan didn't speak. He didn't react when I asked what happened. He didn't blink. He showed no emotion. He just kept driving, hands clenched around the wheel, eyes fixed on the road. Something inside me screamed that the person behind the wheel wasn't my friend. Not completely. Not after what happened at that gas station. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a small motel in the next town. Dylan parked without a word, got out of the car, and went into the room we had reserved earlier.
I followed him, my stomach twisted in terror. As soon as he lay down on the bed, he fell into a deep sleep. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the opposite bed, watching him, wondering what the hell had happened. When he woke up the next morning, everything seemed normal again. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "You don't remember anything from last night?" I replied in a weak voice. He frowned. "Remember what?" "The gas station." His expression went blank. "What gas station?" I froze. He didn't remember being there. He didn't remember going inside. He didn't remember coming out of the darkness with that empty stare, as if that fragment of the night had been erased from his mind. But I remembered it, every damn second. We never talked about it again. We finished the trip and went back home. But every time I see an old gas station with a flickering neon sign, I feel the air grow colder. Because deep down, I know we never should have stopped at that place, and that something in that store was waiting for us.
It's strange how a routine trip can turn into something you'll never forget. I've always been the kind of person who finds comfort in the familiarity of the road. Driving at night, with only the hum of the engine and the soft glow of streetlights, is peaceful, almost meditative. I never expected one of those quiet drives to leave me with a memory that still gives me goosebumps. It was late on a Thursday night, and I was driving home after working a double shift. My usual route was a long highway that cut through rural farmland, a quiet, empty road, especially after dark. Just endless miles of asphalt flanked by fields and scattered trees. I'd driven that way thousands of times without a second thought. The night was clear, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery light over the landscape. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, while the soft murmur of the radio filled the silence inside the car. It was a little after midnight. I was tired, but not enough to worry about falling asleep at the wheel. I still had about an hour to go before getting home. Nothing out of the ordinary, until I saw it. At first, it was just a flash of movement out of my corner of eye. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching behind me. I shook my head, telling myself I was seeing things. It was late after all. But then I saw it again, a figure sitting in the back seat. I jolted, my heart leaping in my chest. I turned my head quickly. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I knew it was. There was no one else in the car with me. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there. It was a barely visible shadow in the dim light, sitting completely still in the back seat. My chest tightened with a wave of panic. I gripped the steering wheel hard, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. I couldn't make out any details, just a blurry outline, a silhouette leaning in the back seat. Every time I looked away, my mind filled with terrifying questions. Was someone really there? Had they been there the whole time? I looked again, hoping it would be gone, but the figure was still there. My heart pounded as I tried to focus on the road. There was no way anyone could have gotten into my car. I had locked it as soon as I got in, and I hadn't stopped since leaving work. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a strange reflection in the mirror. But the longer I stared, the more defined the figure became. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't know what to do. Should I pull over, turn around, and check the back seat? But the thought of stopping on that deserted road in the middle of the night made my blood run cold. What if I stopped and there really was something there? So I kept driving, my mind flooded with terror. Each time I looked at the mirror, the figure was clearer. It wasn't just a reflection, it was there. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to act. I took one last look at the mirror, making sure the figure was still there, then snapped my head around. The back seat was empty, completely empty, just my wrinkled jacket lying where I'd left it earlier. I let out a shaky breath, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I laughed to myself, feeling stupid. I was just tired. My mind was playing tricks on me after a long day. Of course there was no one in the car. But then I looked at the mirror again. The figure was still there. My stomach dropped, and a wave of cold swept through my body. I hadn't imagined it. It was still there, not in the back seat, only in the mirror. Fear crashed over me all at once. I sped up, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the road blurred into streaks of shadows and light. I didn't want to look at the mirror again, but I couldn't help it. Every time my eyes flicked upward, the figure was there. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just sat there, watching me. My breathing became erratic, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. All I could do was keep driving. The road stretched endlessly. Trees rushed past like dark smudges on either side of the car, indifferent to my terror. Finally, I saw the turnoff to my neighborhood. I swerved sharply, tires screeching against the pavement. I was almost home. I pulled into my driveway with a hard stop, my body shaking as I turned off the engine. I didn't stay in the car for a second longer. I jumped out and slammed the door shut, the cold night air wrapping around me. But before running inside, I glanced at the rearview mirror one last time. The back seat was still empty, but the figure was in the mirror, watching me. I didn't wait. I ran inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The silence of my home greeted me with a calm I didn't feel. My mind kept repeating the same question over and over. What the hell had I seen in that mirror that night? I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, replaying what had happened again and again, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But part of me knew the truth. It hadn't been an illusion. It hadn't been a reflection. There had been something in that mirror, and I could still feel its gaze. Months have passed since that night, but every time I drive alone, every time my eyes drift to the rearview mirror, my heart races, because deep down, I'm still afraid that one day that figure will return, waiting for the perfect moment to come back.
There's something about nighttime rest stops that gives me the chills. They're supposed to be a refuge when you're on a long trip, a place where you can stretch your legs, grab a snack, and recharge before getting back on the road. But when the sun goes down and traffic thins out, they take on a completely different atmosphere. Maybe it's the dim lighting or the way everything feels a little too quiet, but if you've ever stopped at one in the middle of the night, you know what I mean. I was on a long drive home after visiting my family, and it was getting late. I'd been on the road for hours, and the combination of fatigue and monotony was starting to get to me. My eyes felt heavy, and I could tell I was beginning to lose focus. I knew I needed a break before I fell asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw the sign for a rest stop a couple of miles ahead. I didn't think twice. I could grab a coffee, walk around a bit, and then be on my way. Simple, right? I arrived at the rest stop shortly after midnight. It was one of the smaller ones, with just a couple of vending machines, a bathroom, and a parking lot with a few scattered cars. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. A few trucks were parked at the far end of the lot, their engines humming softly in the stillness. But other than that, the place was deserted. I parked near the vending machines and stepped out of the car, immediately feeling the weight of the night settle around me. The air was colder than I expected, with a light breeze that made the leaves of the nearby trees rustle. There was something about the silence that made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I was just tired. I went to the bathroom first, planning to splash some water on my face to wake myself up. The place was old, the kind that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. The lights buzzed softly, casting a yellowish glow over the cracked tiles and stained sinks. I turned on the faucet, and the water came out in a weak, sputtering stream. I washed my face, and as I was drying my hands on my jeans, I heard the door creak open behind me. I looked up at the mirror and saw a man standing in the doorway, his face partially hidden in the shadows. He was tall, with an unkempt beard and a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment, staring at me. I nodded at him, trying to seem casual, but inside my heart was starting to pound. Something about the way he just stood there, motionless, gave me a bad feeling. "Hey," I muttered as I headed for the exit. He didn't respond. He just kept watching me as I walked past him. Outside, the air felt even colder, and the wind had picked up. A shiver ran through me as I walked back toward my car. I tried to shake off the strange encounter, telling myself the guy was probably just another tired traveler, maybe a trucker taking a break. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, that sense of unease wouldn't leave me. I reached my car, but instead of getting in right away, I decided to grab a snack from the vending machine. Maybe a little sugar would help keep me awake for the rest of the drive. I dug some coins out of my pocket and pressed the button for a chocolate bar. The machine hummed softly before dropping the candy into the tray. Just as I bent down to pick it up, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I turned around, expecting to see the man from the bathroom, but the parking lot was empty. The trucks were still parked at the far end, their engines rumbling quietly, but there was no one else in sight. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I wondered if I imagined the footsteps. I glanced back toward the bathroom. The man was gone. The door was closed, and the dim light inside cast long, eerie shadows across the pavement. My skin prickled again. I decided I'd had enough. I didn't need coffee or a snack that badly. I just wanted to get back on the road and put some distance between myself and whatever it was that was making me so nervous. I turned to open my car door, but when my hand touched the handle, my heart stopped. For a split second, the door was already unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it when I got out. I always did, especially at a rest stop at night. My hand froze on the handle as my mind raced. Had I forgotten to lock it, or had someone opened it while I was in the bathroom? I hesitated for a moment, then carefully opened the door and looked inside. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, no sign that anyone had been there. But that didn't ease the knot of fear tightening in my chest. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. The hum of the car gave me a small sense of relief, but as I pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man from the bathroom standing in the shadows, watching me drive away, but the rest stop was empty. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and the mind plays tricks on you when you're alone in a quiet place like that. Still, the feeling of unease clung to me like a cold sweat. The rest of the drive was a blur. I didn't stop, I didn't slow down, I just kept driving, eyes fixed on the road, fear pulsing in my chest. When I finally got home, the sun was starting to rise, bathing the world in warm, golden light. But even in daylight, I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the flickering light in the rearview mirror, the man standing in the bathroom doorway with his cold, expressionless eyes. Those moments still haunt me every time I stop at a rest area late at night. There's something about those places, something unsettling that I can't explain. And now, every time I park at one, I always make sure to check the locks, because sometimes what makes us uneasy at night isn't just in our heads. Sometimes it's real.
There's something about camping that makes you feel both deeply connected to nature and incredibly vulnerable. Being alone in the woods, far from civilization, surrounded by darkness and the sounds of wildlife, is an experience that can be either peaceful or terrifying. I had camped many times before, but that night I discovered that sometimes it's not the animals or the weather you need to fear. It was a late summer weekend, and I decided to go on a solo camping trip. I needed to clear my mind after a few stressful weeks at work. I found a spot in a remote state park, an area I had never been to before. The place was perfect, isolated, with no one around for miles, just me, the trees, and the quiet. I arrived at the site in the afternoon, just as the sun began to sink behind the trees. I still had enough light to set up my tent by the river, with the water flowing gently a few meters away. It was peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I lit a campfire as night fell, prepared my dinner, and sat down to enjoy the silence. The sound of crickets and the whisper of leaves in the night breeze created a calming atmosphere. I sat by the fire, feeling its warmth on my face as the stars appeared in the sky. But then I noticed it, a movement, barely a flicker at the edge of the firelight. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a play of light and shadows dancing with the flames. But there was something about that shape that felt different. It was too solid, too still. I stood up, squinting into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice firm. Nothing, just the crackle of the fire and the murmur of the river. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed the beam at the edge of the campsite. The light illuminated the trees, but there was nothing there, or at least nothing I could see. I let out a sigh and sat back down, telling myself I was just tired. But the unease didn't leave me. The forest was too quiet. The crickets, the frogs, everything had stopped. I forced myself to ignore it, throwing more wood on the fire and trying to distract myself. But every few minutes, I felt the urge to look toward the edge of the woods, as if something was there, waiting. Finally, I decided to go to sleep. I put out the fire, crawled into the tent, and zipped it closed. The small space felt comforting, a barrier between me and the darkness of the forest. But when I lay down, I couldn't relax. I felt that presence. I heard every snap of a branch, every small whisper of the wind among the trees. And then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. I froze completely. The steps were soft, careful, as if whoever was walking didn't want to be heard. They weren't the erratic movements of an animal. They were methodical, human. They stopped just outside my tent. My heart pounded so hard I feared the sound would give me away. The tent was thin. If someone was out there, they could see my silhouette against the moonlight. I gripped the flashlight in my hand, debating whether to turn it on or stay in the darkness. The silence dragged on. I held my breath, listening for any hint of movement. Then something scratched the tent fabric. It wasn't a strong scratch. It was slow, deliberate, as if someone were sliding their nails gently along the material. Panic hit me like a wave. I wanted to run, but fear kept me frozen. The scratching moved around the tent, first on one side, then the other, as if they were exploring, trying to see what I would do. My mind clouded with terrifying images. Who was out there? What did they want? And most importantly, why weren't they saying anything? I forced myself to breathe slowly. If they came in, I would have to react fast. But before I could decide what to do, the sound stopped. Again, absolute silence. I stayed listening, every muscle tense. Seconds passed, then minutes. Nothing. I don't know how long I stayed awake waiting for the sound to return, but it never did. Somehow, at some point in the early morning, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell asleep. When I woke, the light of dawn filled the tent. I lay there for a moment, trying to process the night before. It had been real, I knew that, but I needed proof. I stepped out of the tent and checked the ground around it. The leaves and soil were disturbed. And there, in the soft, damp earth, I saw the tracks. But they weren't human, not entirely. They were elongated, with deep marks at the tips, like claws. They followed a pattern around my tent before disappearing into the woods. My stomach turned. Something was there, something that didn't want to be seen. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I packed up my things as fast as I could and walked to my car without stopping, without looking back. I never camped alone after that. And every time I hear something moving in the dark, I remember that night. I remember the sound of nails against the fabric, and I wonder what would have happened if I had dared to look outside.
There's an unspoken rule when you go camping. When the fire dies down and the stars appear, the forest changes. The trees seem to close in around you. Every little sound is amplified in the stillness of the night. It's in that moment when the forest begins to breathe with you, and suddenly you become aware of how alone you are. I've always liked that feeling, until the night one of my friends disappeared without a trace. It was a simple camping trip, 5 of us, my girlfriend Amanda, my best friend Nick and his girlfriend Jess, and Ryan, another close friend. Just a weekend in nature to get away from the city. The place was perfect, a remote clearing deep in the forest, miles from the nearest town, no cell service, no distractions, just us, the trees, and a campfire. The first day was incredible. We hiked hidden trails, swam in a crystal-clear lake, and set up camp in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. When the sun began to set, we gathered round the fire, chatting, laughing, telling scary stories. It was the perfect night. Then, Ryan stood up, stretched, shook his arms, and said, "I'm going for a walk." The flames of the fire lit up his face as he spoke. Nick frowned. "Where are you going?" "Just for a little walk," Ryan replied with a shrug. "The night's too beautiful to stay still." No one thought much of it. Ryan was like that, always disappearing on nighttime walks, losing himself in nature to clear his mind. "Don't get lost," Amanda joked. Ryan smiled, grabbed his flashlight, and walked into the forest. We saw his light flicker between the trees for a few seconds, then disappear. At first, we kept talking, but after an hour, we began to worry. "He's taking too long," Jess said anxiously. Nick shrugged. "He's probably enjoying the walk," but something in his voice betrayed his confidence. We waited another 30 minutes. Nothing. The forest was completely silent. Amanda hugged herself. We should look for him. Nick and I grabbed our flashlights and entered the forest, calling his name. "Ryan." Nothing. The beam of light cut through the dense underbrush. The trees seemed taller, the shadows darker. We kept moving, but there were no signs of him, no footprints, no broken branches, as if he had never been there. "Maybe he went back to the camp," Nick said, though his voice wavered. We turned back. The path back felt different, as if the forest had changed while we were inside. When we returned to the camp, Amanda and Jess were standing by the fire, their faces glowing in the orange light. Amanda stepped forward. I shook my head. "He's not here." Jess brought a hand to her mouth. "Then where is he?" Silence. The wind blew softly through the trees, and for the first time, I felt something was watching us. We decided to split up and search the surrounding area. Amanda and I took one side of the camp, Nick and Jess the other. We called his name over and over, but there was no answer. Only the crunch of dry leaves under our feet. Only the distant murmur of the wind. Only the forest watching. After what felt like an eternity, we regrouped. No one had found him. No trace. Nothing. "We have to go to town," Amanda said, her voice tense. "We need help." We didn't argue. We grabbed what we could carry and started the walk back. 2 hours through darkness. 2 hours of tension. Every step, every shadow seemed alive. Every branch snapping made us turn our heads. But we saw nothing, heard nothing, only the forest breathing. When we reached the town, we contacted the authorities. They organized a search and took us back to the camp at dawn, this time with a rescue team. They checked every trail, every tree, every corner, but Ryan wasn't there. They kept searching for days. Nothing. In the end, all that remained was an official report, disappearance under unknown circumstances. We returned to the city, but the story didn't end there. Every night I relived what happened, the laughter around the campfire, Ryan's last words, the exact moment he walked into the darkness and never came back. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see him, his silhouette lit by the fire, his flashlight disappearing among the trees, and that unsettling feeling that the forest knew something we didn't. I don't know what happened to Ryan that night, but I know something took him. And the worst part is, it's still out there, waiting, watching,
And next time, it might not be satisfied with just one of us.